Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. I have a question for you. Can you pay attention to how you're breathing right now? Are you breathing comfortably? Is your mouth open or closed? Are you an overbreather? Is your breathing fast and shallow? If you're like most people, you probably don't give much thought to how you breathe, because breathing is an innate bodily function. We take it for granted. We enter into the world with the breath, and the process of breathing continues automatically. We don't pay much attention to it, unless, of course, something goes wrong. But the way we breathe has an enormous impact on our health. To quote my guest directly, breathing impacts every aspect of health: sleep, digestion, movement, mental health, disease, and recovery. It's an extraordinary resource with life-changing potential, and it's simple, free, and available to everyone. You're about to learn some great information and practical techniques that are key to healthy breathing and healthy living. If you're on my mailing list, you have probably received the last 2 emails with my favorite self-help books from 2021. The Breathing Cure by Patrick McKeown was one of them. It's such a comprehensive guide, grounded in scientific research, with 26 easy self-practice breathing exercises for adults and children. If you're like me and have a strong interest in the subject matter, this book is a must-read. It covers so much ground that we didn't even get to explore in today's episode. Patrick McKeown is the founder and director of education and training at Buteyko Clinic International and creator and master instructor of the Oxygen Advantage. He graduated from Trinity College Dublin, completed his clinical training in Russia, where he was accredited as a breathing coach by the renowned physician Dr. Konstantin Buteyko. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology. His work has appeared in international medical journals, including the Journal of Clinical Medicine, and he speaks at sleep and dentistry conferences worldwide. Patrick has helped tens of thousands of people worldwide to improve their health and performance. He has trained elite military special forces, SWAT teams, and Olympic coaches and athletes, an internationally recognized leading light in breathing for sports performance, sleep, and childhood development. Patrick is breathing advisor to the Extreme Performance Training XPT program, created by American big wave surfer Lord Hamilton, and has taught more than 700 breathing instructors across 50 countries. His best-selling book, The Oxygen Advantage, is available in 14 languages. Patrick is deeply committed to communicating his knowledge of breathing science and works tirelessly to transcend barriers that prevent an accessible approach to well-being and performance. In today's conversation, Patrick explains the difference between functional and dysfunctional breathing, the effects of dysfunctional breathing on our health. He emphasizes the importance of nasal breathing, the roles and misconceptions about oxygen and CO2, teaches us to breathe correctly to get more oxygenation to our brain and cells, to improve focus, concentration, sleep, ease anxiety and stress, relax the nervous system, overall health and performance. And get this, it turns out breathing for women is different. This is such a rich episode, packed not only with great information, but also practical tips that you can apply right away. For example, how to open a blocked nose. I also asked him about mask wearing. Is it good? Is it bad? What does it do to us? As well as learned interesting things about dry lips, double chin, ADHD and breathing, and mouth taping at night for better sleep. Simply fascinating stuff. Patrick's passion for breathing education comes from his own personal experience. He was an extreme dysfunctional breather and an asthmatic. He was told by doctors he would be on medications for the rest of his life. He cured himself through breathing practices. Disclaimer: the information presented in this podcast episode is not specific medical advice for any individual or should not substitute medical advice from a health professional. Please enjoy this fascinating conversation with Patrick McEwen. Before we get to today's show, a quick shout out to our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most nutrient-dense whole foods daily supplement that I've ever tried. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for cultivating and practicing what I call radical self-care. If you want to show up greatly in your parenting, you need to take care of yourself. And part of radical self-care is eating right. But with so many stressors in our lives, in our go, do culture, juggling busy schedules and multitude of responsibilities, maintaining a healthy, well-balanced diet can be difficult, especially for parents. And that can leave us deficient in key nutrients that our bodies need to thrive. This is where Athletic Greens can help. It's a life-changing nutritional habit. Their daily all-in-one superfood powder is your nutritional essential. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you one thing with all the best things. I've been using it for the past 2 years as part of my morning routine, and I love the simplicity, the ease of it, and it's delicious too. One tasty scoop of AG1 Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced ingredients, probiotic, and more that all work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid with digestion, and support a healthy immune system, all without the need to take multiple products or pills. I take it in the morning and I'm ready to face the day. And right now, for the listeners of my podcast, Athletic Greens has a special offer. A free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/authentic parenting and you'll be able to access this offer. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/authentic parenting and get your free supply of vitamin D for a year and 5 free travel packs. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Anna.
I'm so excited about this conversation. I absolutely loved your book and devoured it. And I think this is like the Bible of breathing. You put so much information, so well researched, so many interesting stories. And of course, I love how you structured the book. You put the good part in the beginning, the exercises for people to do in the beginning. So it's just a phenomenal book. First of all, congratulations.
Great. No, thanks very much. That means a lot. I suppose one of the purposes of the book was to take breathing out of the woo-woo space. I just needed to kind of show that, like, I've worked with breathing for 20 years. I've seen tremendous results across a number of different spectrums. I think it's very, very important for children. Mm-hmm. Even though that it's been written about for almost 100 years, most people are unaware of it. And breathing it offers a lot more than what has been currently put out there. So that was one of the purposes of the breathing cure, was just can we help improve awareness so that people take it a little bit more seriously?
Yeah, I think it's so fundamental. We always talk about sleep, exercise, eating, nutrition, all of those aspects, managing stress. But it sounds like from reading this book, I am convinced that it begins with breathing.
Well, I think the two pillars it begins with is sleep and breathing, but both are interlinked. And like I remember 23 years ago when I came across this by accident. I taped my mouth closed that night. I know that sounds a little bit extreme, but I woke up the second morning after the night taped. So the first morning I woke up, I didn't feel much of a difference. The second morning I woke up and it was the best feeling that I'd felt in about 15 years. I never knew what it was like to wake up feeling refreshed. And, it's of course, sleep is paramount and everybody talks about sleep hygiene and all of that is good sense. But the elephant in the room when it comes to sleep is breathing in and out through your nose.
So I want to talk about your story because I think it's important, your personal story. Can you share a little bit and how you had a nose surgery and after that, nobody told you how to use nasal breathing, and then
Yes.
we'll go from there. I think it's important.
Yeah, I was a kid like any other child growing up with asthma. I grew up in Ireland. And when you have asthma, you don't just have asthma. It's not just limited to your lungs. You're more likely to have stuffy nose and nasal congestion. And as a result, then I was a chronic mouth breather. Chronic mouth breathing contributes to faster breathing and upper chest breathing. And this can affect your emotional states. And I never thought that I had anxiety or anything like that. But I was a little highly strung and my mind raced quite a bit. The biggest problem that I had was not just having asthma, but my sleep was the big problem. And in primary school, which was the age up until about 11 years of age, I was actually quite bright in school. It all fell apart when I went to high school. And I went from towards the top of the class right down to the bottom of the class. And at 14 years of age, I left school out of a total sense of frustration because I felt I was going nowhere with it. Now, I was pretty headstrong. So people might say, well, how come his parents allowed him to do that? You have to bear in mind, this is 35 years ago. The environment was quite different. And many kids left school at age 14 or 15, and they went on to do trades. Now, just as it turned out, I went back to school a year later, and I studied to get my exams in high school, but I was studying for 10 and 12 hours a day. Like, all I can remember in my teenage years was doing nothing else but studying, nothing else. And university as well, to get grades, first, second, third, fourth year. It took a lot of work. And it was only afterwards I realized at the age of 26 and 27, this could have been a lot easier because I didn't have good concentration and I didn't have a good attention span. But I would put that down to faulty breathing patterns and lousy sleep. I had sleep disorder breathing. I was told at university when I stayed in student dorms, I was told that I would be snoring and then I would stop breathing. And I didn't know that. Of course, that's obstructive sleep apnea. So I'm not alone. There are thousands, millions of children in the same situation. And the big problem here is it's overlooked. And these kids will be labeled as maybe difficult kids to be working with or challenging kids or children who are not paying attention. We have to bring it back to this. Education, we spend 16 years in general in formal education. And to be able to achieve academically, we need to be able to concentrate and we need to have a good attention span. So education demands concentration and education demands a good attention span, but nobody teaches us how to concentrate, how to develop a good attention span. And I would say that the first foundation to this is sleep and functional breathing. And it's not about the quality, it's not about the quantity of sleep. I remember as a youngster sleeping for 10 hours. I would be still tired. It's really about the quality of sleep. And if you have a child with sleep disorder breathing, and there's more to this, Anna, there was a study that was done by Karen Bonnock in the UK across either a 4 to 6 year period. So a longitudinal study. She looked at 11,000 British kids, children who were snoring and children with sleep disorder breathing at age 5. If untreated, these kids had a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8. She talks about it in her article in the paper that was published in the journal Pediatrics in 2012. During deep sleep, the child's brain is growing. And if the child is not getting deep sleep, it's going to affect development of the brain. Now, it's really high time that pediatricians and medical doctors started investigating children's sleep and also looking at the risk factors. Snoring is a risk factor, but also is mouth breathing. And 25 to 50% of studied children persistently breathe through an open mouth. It affects not just the development of the brain, it develops development of their jaws, their facial structure, and, their quality of life. And I really feel what is after going on here? Why has this been overlooked? And this is not new information, as I said. There was an article that was written back in Dental Cosmos, which was a dental journal back in the day in 1909. And it spoke about the child with the mouth open, inattentive in school, dull and expressionless face. The children is accusing the child of not paying attention. And I'm reading this 111 years later, and I'm thinking this could have been written yesterday. So it has been a crying shame from the medical profession, and it has been a crying shame from the dental profession. And it has not been driven by either professions. What has driven the whole emphasis on breathing has been instructors like ourselves who have been talking about the importance of nasal breathing for the last 20 years. And very often it was falling on deaf ears. Yet the studies are there. And, any parent, if you go into PubMed, put in nasal breathing and oral breathing in children, and you will find studies. That's why I put a couple of chapters in the book as well, specifically for sleep disorder breathing in children, but also for development of the face. If we look at the number of children requiring orthodontic intervention, what causes crooked teeth? Is it because the jaws are too small, or is it because the teeth are too big? Well, one school of thought in orthodontistry, which is the most common and traditional school, is that the teeth are too big. So the objective there is to remove teeth, to make room for the existing teeth and then straighten the children's teeth. The problem with extractions of teeth is that if a child has extraction of teeth, it makes the jaws even smaller. And if the jaws are made even smaller, there's not enough room for the tongue in the roof of the mouth. And as a result, then, this is going to affect the airway. And this can increase the risk of sleep disorder breathing for the rest of that child's life. The other school of thought in orthodontistry is that the jaws are too small. The problem is not the teeth, the problem is the jaws. And this school of orthodontistry would be called functional orthodontics. So their emphasis on expanding the jaws to make room for the teeth, but also to make room for the tongue. So a functional orthodontist is not just looking at the child's teeth, but the functional orthodontist is looking at the child's face. Like I've seen cases, and I've seen cases close to home, where teeth were extracted and the jaws were pulled back, and it makes the nose look bigger. And the whole face, as it's pulled back, is making the airway smaller. And, this is a debate that needs to be conducted in dentistry. Now, there are many tremendous orthodontists, I have to say, who get this. And there are many who have been talking about this for decades, but ridiculed by their peers. I wrote about that also in the book. Why should an orthodontist be ridiculed by their peers when the orthodontist is talking about the importance of the child breathing in and out through the nose with correct tongue resting posture? Nature has equipped us with a nose to breathe. The mouth has no functions whatsoever when it comes to breathing. If one was to open the mouth and to look into the mouth and to ask the question, what part of the mouth is devoted to the breath? There is no part. The mouth has nothing got to do with breathing. The mouth is a hole. It's an entry point to allow air into the lungs. It should be used in an emergency. It's nose breathing that moistens and regulates volume, warms the incoming air, harnesses nasal nitric oxide, better recruitment of the diaphragm, slows down breathing. This in turn has got better emotional regulation, better balance in the autonomic nervous system, because when we breathe low, slow, nose low and slow, we tend to be in better balance. We're not in that increased fight or flight response. Whereas mouth breathing is more sympathetically driven, faster breathing, upper chest breathing, impacts sleep. So, I think it's time that we really went back to basics with this one, and children are so easy to work with. And all of the children's breathing exercises are free online. If you go in on YouTube, you will see every single breathing exercise for children. You don't need me. You don't need any book. You don't need anything. It's all there. So it's important for parents to realize that.
And also, I don't want to focus on children today, but I want to focus on parents, because parents are stressed out. They need to regulate their emotions. They need to regulate their stress. They have racing thoughts and they lose control. They yell at their children. They lose their temper and things become turbulent in the household. So it's important for the parent to know this information, to take care of themselves, to sleep better. A lot of people in our community, including myself, have anxiety. And you write about this. But so what is functional breathing and what is dysfunctional breathing, and what does dysfunctional breathing do to our body? Like, how does it manifest? Can you speak about that so people know the difference?
Sure. The best way to think about dysfunctional breathing is to ask yourself the question, how do you breathe when you get into a difficult situation? So when a human being feels stressed, how does their breathing change? Their breathing becomes faster, more upper chest. They have irregular breathing. They may sigh more, or they may stop breathing altogether. They may be breathing through the mouth. Their breathing becomes harder. That's dysfunctional breathing. But the thing about dysfunctional breathing is that the individual is breathing like that all of the time. Now, it's not that they are having a panic attack. It just means that their breathing can be a little bit faster, a little bit upper chest, a little bit irregular, a little bit harder. And the problem with dysfunctional breathing is that, I'll tell you my story. 23 years ago, when I first came across the importance of breathing light, I remember sitting down and deliberately taking less air into my body. And I slowed down my breathing to the point of air hunger. And it was the first time that I started noticing my hands getting warm. My hands got warmer and there was increased watery saliva in the mouth. Now that happened within about 3 to 4 minutes. It's very common for people with dysfunctional breathing to have cold hands and cold feet. Why? Because your blood vessels become narrow when your breathing is too hard and too fast. There's a myth out there that it's good to be taking a deep, full, big breath. And many people have taken these big breaths. And it doesn't help you, even though it might feel a bit better at the time. But if you were to take 5 or 10 big breaths, how does your head feel? Normally, one will feel maybe a little bit lightheaded or a little bit off. So what's happening there? Well, the harder you breathe, the more you blow off carbon dioxide from the blood through the lungs. And it's the loss of carbon dioxide from the blood that causes blood vessels to constrict. Not only do blood vessels constrict when you breathe more air than what you need, but oxygen is not delivered so easily to the tissues and organs. So functional breathing is about breathing in and out through the nose. It's driven by the diaphragm. It's regular. It's effortless. And that's a key component of functional breathing. It's not an effort to breathe. Now, one can measure their functional breathing or dysfunctional breathing by simply using breath hold time. We call it the BOLT in the oxygen advantage. And it simply involves the person sitting down, taking a normal breath in and out through their nose and pinching their nose and holding their nose and timing it in seconds until they feel the first definite desire to breathe, and then to let go to breathe in through the nose. According to Professor Kyle Kiesel, who did a study of 51 individuals that was published in 2018, if your Bolt score is above 25 seconds, there is an 89% chance that dysfunctional breathing is not present. So adults need to have a Bolt score of greater than 25 seconds. Many will have a Bolt score of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 seconds. This indicates that their breathing is faster, more likely to be upper chest, harder breathing. Faster and harder breathing and upper chest breathing, we are more likely to be stressed. So it's not that the individual will feel stressed all the time, but they might respond to situations quite strongly. It's not the situation that causes us the stress, but it's really, my point here is that you can have one situation, but you could have 2 or 3 people confronting that situation. One person may be calm, but the other person might go completely off their head. Why does one person react so strongly to the situation? It's almost as if they are teetering on the brink of symptoms, and all it takes is the slightest event to throw them into an explosion. But we can change that, because by changing breathing patterns, and especially understanding the breath, if we were to think about how can we help to bring the body and mind into relaxation, your breathing should be in and out through the nose, full stop, both during rest and physical exercise, but also during sleep. Because if a parent is waking up in the morning with a dry mouth, they are not likely to wake up feeling refreshed. And already, concentration is impacted, productivity is impacted, mood is impacted. We are not in a good mood when we've had a lousy sleep. It's normal. So expecting somebody to feel calm and to have quietness of the mind, even though they have sleep disorder breathing, it's not going to happen. And even when we think about the psychologists and the psychotherapists and the counselors who are doing cognitive behavioral therapy and whatever interventions they are doing, how many of them are looking at sleep quality? How many of them are looking at functional breathing? And the answer is that not many are. You cannot address mental health issues if the individual has obstructive sleep apnea and snoring and insomnia without actually addressing their sleep. And you cannot address mental health issues if the individual is breathing faster and shallow, and if their physiology is in that increased sympathetic drive. So when it comes to breathing, the breath in is more sympathetically driven, or basically a stressor, not a stressor, but it's when the vagus nerve steps back. So it's almost that the foot has been taken off the pedal. So during inhalation, it's more under the body's stress response. And the exhalation is completely under the control of the body's relaxation response. If we breathe out fast, it's a stressor. The brain recognizes that the body is under threat. But if we were to breathe in, soft breath in through the nose, and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out, the brain interprets that the body is safe, and the brain will send signals of calm to the body. And it's known since the early 1900s that when the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that's wandering throughout the human body, when it's stimulated, it secretes a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine causes the heart rate to slow down. And when the heart rate slows down, the brain interprets that the body is safe. So the next time somebody is in a tricky situation, and start off with small situations, bring your attention onto your breathing. Take a very soft, gentle breath coming into your nose, and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. A soft breath coming into your nose, and a really relaxed and a slow and gentle exhalation. Do that for 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds. And that can be enough to evoke a relaxation response. Now, what about the person, though, with dysfunctional breathing that sees red at the slightest of difficulties? It would be very important for them to improve their breathing patterns. That if that individual has a low breath hold time, which they would be more likely to have, And with a low breath hold time, they are breathing faster and they're breathing upper chest. That individual they're going to fly off the edge at the littlest and minutest of situations. We all know people like this. The smallest of things happen and they go crazy, and again, like why this is where breathing can really, really play that role. And I'm not going to say that breathing is the absolute answer for everything. It's not, but I will say this, if you can control your breathing, you will have some degree of control over the mind.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many things here. I found that the misconception about take a deep breath, just take a deep breath, just take a deep breath is just a misconception. And yet so many yoga and mindfulness professionals or instructors keep pushing this message, right? A lot of people take this deep breath and exhale with a sigh. It's like so common, but it turns out it's not even useful. That's not the answer. So nose, low, slow. I love how it rhymes together. So nasal breathing is key. Light breathing is key. And I read in the book and I heard you speak about when you breathe lightly, even the hair in your nostrils shouldn't move. That's how you should breathe, right? And we all know people who breathe heavy. You can hear them huffing and puffing. And it's interesting how, yes, stress makes us breathe shallow and faster and upper body, but then that continues. And so we sort of we constantly trigger our own stress response. And I have seen that in myself in the past until I came across your work and other people's work. Now I consciously pay attention to my breathing. I try to practice nasal breathing. I tape my mouth at night, or when I exercise, I try to do nasal breathing, which is hard. But so the BOLT score, is it stand for body oxygen level test, right? The BOLT.
Yes.
So the BOLT score, if it's lower than 25, you have dysfunctional breathing. If it's higher than that, you have functional breathing. Is that right?
That's correct. Now, if you're around 22 seconds, you're doing pretty okay in terms of functional breathing. If we're working with athletes, our objective is to reach 40 seconds. And many people will achieve a BOLT score of above 25 seconds. Now, with people with anxiety and panic disorder, oftentimes they have a lower BOLT score. And say, for example, as well, the instruction to take a deep breath is actually correct. It's just that the interpretation of it is incorrect. If we were to say that a deep breath is basically breathing low with optimal movement of the diaphragm, but what happens is that instructors, when they're giving guidance to their students, they'll often have their students take these full big breaths, and you can hear the student breathing. And the problem with that is that there's a risk of the student overbreathing. And by overbreathing, they're blowing off too much carbon dioxide. And this actually causes their blood vessels to constrict, including blood flow to the brain. The more air we breathe, the less blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. And brain cell excitability can increase. And I will also say this, that mindfulness is wonderful, but it doesn't work for the very person who needs it the most. Between 2010 and 2013, I worked with 3,000 individuals with panic disorder and anxiety. I was teaching them the biochemistry, so breathe light to improve their blood flow. I was also exposing them to a little bit of air hunger to desensitize the reaction to suffocation by doing the breathe light exercise. I was teaching them breathe slow to bring about a better balance in the autonomic nervous system, and also to breathe low. And by breathing light and breathing slow and breathing low, and also nasal breathing during sleep, we helped to bring a balance in their physiology. Now, I asked them the question, every person who came in through my door, I was working with them in small groups, and I asked, how many of you here have meditated in the past? These are people that were suffering with a history of anxiety and panic disorder and depression. I would say about 5% of them said that they were meditating in the past. And I asked, how many of you still meditate? Very few. And I began to understand, or I began to think, why? What on earth is going on here? Here are 3,000 people but yet they are not practicing mindfulness. And it's mindfulness which is typically told that they should be doing this because it will help them. And theoretically, it makes a lot of sense. However, if our mind is in a state of emotional turmoil, and if our mind is racing, the last thing we want to do is to pay attention to the mind. Instead, we should be thinking about how to change their breathing to change their states. Because there's small breath hold exercises you could be doing. You could be humming. You could be going for a walk with your mouth closed. And by using breathing exercises to improve your functional breathing, to bring a calmness in the autonomic nervous system, which includes the brain, then bring in breath aware, then bring in body aware, get people out of their heads, and then bring in mind aware. So I often feel that people who are working in the healthcare professions, and probably I'm guilty of this as well, that we typically stay within our own domain and we don't go outside of those boundaries. We know, and we, of course, we don't know what we don't know. That's the way it is. But there is a reluctance in the field of psychotherapy and psychology and counseling, and I would even say yoga and Pilates, to delve deeper into the possibilities of what breathing can do. I can think of the potential of yoga here, the enormous potential that students who are going to the yoga instructor, if that yoga instructor was to go through how to breathe to improve your blood flow, how to breathe to improve oxygen delivery throughout the body, how to breathe to stimulate the vagus nerve, how to breathe to improve your sleep, what breathing techniques should you do to engage the diaphragm, what breathing techniques should you do if you're stressed? That yoga instructor will help every single person coming through their door. And what's more, it's not enough just how to breathe while you're inside the studio. We have students coming in. Of course, I give them breathing exercises to do in the studio, but the whole premise is that I'm giving them the instruction of how to breathe outside the studio. And if we can give people those tools that are based in total normal physiology, there's nothing woo-woo. And yes, the research can be scant. We do our best to put the research together. Breathing is not one of those functions that does get a lot of research, unfortunately, probably because there's not a lot of money to be made from it. And oftentimes, it's the thing that gets the research is the thing that's going to promise a lot of profit, so, but aside from that, it doesn't mean that there is not a good application here. And I would say to any listener, go into PubMed and put in oral breathing and sleep. And I guarantee you will not find a paper that is saying that it is better to breathe through your mouth than your nose during sleep. It's not. All of the papers that I've come across, even though we would love to see much, much more research, but all of the papers that I'm aware of, all I could see was that nasal breathing is superior in terms of deeper sleep and reduced risk of sleep disorder breathing, including obstructive sleep apnea. Now, when it comes to insomnia, insomnia is very prevalent, especially as we get older. The individual has difficulty falling asleep, or they wake up at maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They're lying there awake after a few hours of sleep. Insomnia reflects that the person is in that increased sympathetic drive. They are hyper aroused. They are switched on and they can't switch off. How could you switch off the last 15 minutes before you go to bed? Sit in a comfortable chair. Focus your attention on the airflow coming into your nose and on the airflow leaving the nose, and really slow down the speed of the air as it enters and leaves the nostrils. So breathe so softly, almost that you feel hardly any air coming into the nose. And at the top of the breath, a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And the purpose here is to breathe less air. Take less air into your body so that you feel air hunger. And air hunger signifies that carbon dioxide is increased in the blood. But the increase of carbon dioxide in the blood will stimulate the vagus nerve. It's likely that you will feel increased watery saliva in the mouth. Whenever you feel increased watery saliva in the mouth, you know that the body and mind is going into relaxation. Why? Because when we are relaxed, we are prepared for the digestion of food. Increased water saliva is telling us that the body is ready for the digestion of food. How does the mouth go when we get into a stressful state? The mouth goes dry, dry mouth. We can change our own physiology. You know, I was listening
so fascinating. I find this so fascinating.
I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. He's based in the United Kingdom.
He's been on my podcast before.
Is he?
Yes, he has.
Wonderful guy.
I love him. Yeah.
You'll come across a podcast that he did in May of 2021. He was talking to a brain surgeon. And the brain.
I know. Yes. Raul.
Correct. That's exactly it.
Yes.
You will come across it that the brain surgeon, Rahul, he said, when I get into a tricky situation, the first thing I do is prevent myself from hyperventilating. And he said, people think that I have nerves of steel. He knows this, but it's unfortunate that the school kid doesn't know it. The high school kid, the university student, the mom, the dad, they don't know this. So the next time we get into a tricky situation, the first thing that we should be doing is preventing ourselves from hyperventilating. Now, those individuals with a higher BOLT score are less likely to hyperventilate. They will be more resilient. The individuals with the lower BOLT score are more likely to hyperventilate. But even those individuals with the lower BOLT score, when they feel that their breathing is becoming harder and faster, keep breathing through your nose, but slow down your breathing. Take the soft breath in through your nose and remember the relaxed and slow and gentle breath out. Because when you do that relaxed and slow and gentle breath out, you are literally telling the brain that everything is okay. It might take you a few breaths to get that signal to the brain. And it's likely because throughout our evolution, whenever we did get into an emergency, it was always accompanied by harder and faster breathing. Because harder and faster breathing, the brain is recognizing that the body is under threat, and the brain is here to protect the body. When we have a difficult situation and we have faster and harder breathing, the brain wants to get us out of that situation. So you can imagine the person, they're in the family home, the child is after doing something or whatever, things happen, and the parent is going into the fight or flight. And what's the brain saying to the parent? The brain saying to the body, the brain is saying, get out of this situation. It's not a time for composure, or rational decision-making.
Or attack your child, because your child is the source of threat, right?
Yes.
Everything in your environment becomes the source of threat.
Yes. And it's just like, and you know, when I was listening to the podcast, I was saying, such simple information that I could have done with this for 25 years. You know, the first 25 years of my life, I was lucky. I came across it when I was pretty young. But many people, they are going to their healthcare professional, and their healthcare professional, unfortunately, doesn't understand the link between how you can change your breathing to change your state. It's really, really important. Now, there's another thing I'm going to add. Back in 2010 to 2013, 90% of the people who attended those courses, which were specifically for anxiety, racing mind, panic disorder, were women. Very few men. And I couldn't help feeling that there were a lot of men suffering anxiety, but yet they wouldn't do a breathing course. And that's why I wrote a book then called The Oxygen Advantage. And it was aimed at high performance sports, but high performance state of mind. I feel that the language that we use, I can understand it from a man's perspective and also from many women's perspective. They're not necessarily going to go into a bookstore and come out with a book on anxiety. But what they might do is go into a bookstore and come out with a book with a title about improving their performance. So in 2021, I wrote a very simple book called Atomic Focus. I'm not here to plug it, but I'm just here to kind of give you my ideas.
Go ahead, because these are useful resources. Yes.
But my reasoning here is that when we think about concentration, concentration is our ability to hold our attention on one thing. Our attention span is the length of time that we can hold our attention on one thing. And focus is narrowing our attention to one thing. Focus by concentration, by attention span, determines success. In order to improve concentration and attention span, we need to be able to train the brain, but we also need to change physiology, and we also need to improve sleep. The very tools that we use, and I work with special weapons and tactics, Navy SEALs, Premiership footballers, really high-end people. These people don't have anxiety, but they use the exact same tools to change their states. The very same tools that we use to change states, by virtue of bringing some control over the mind and allowing the individual to direct their attention to what they want to direct it upon, it brings a stillness to the mind and a gap between thoughts. In order to achieve flow state, that state of mind whereby we are in a state of relaxation and alertness at the same time, this is a coveted state that sports people and would, if they could replicate it, and it can be replicated, or people in the corporate environment, or the artist, the musician, anybody who is doing a task which can take their full attention. But we can achieve flow states, but in order to achieve flow states, we need to have concentration. We don't have concentration or good concentration if we have poor sleep and lousy breathing. So in terms of changing states, I'm going to go full circle. The same tools that we use to improve concentration and attention span are the exact same techniques to help reduce anxiety, to quieten the mind, because there's a direct relationship between our ability to hold our attention and the racing mind. When the mind is racing, we cannot hold attention. When there's a quietness of the mind, we can hold attention. So for the listener, never feel that this is not for you, because if this is good enough for Navy SEALs, if this is good enough for elite athletes, and I think it's really important that we can take our attention onto our breathing and into our body. And personally, I'm not sure what I would have done without these tools, because life is softer. Like, we have a society whereby people are going from highs right down to the low. When things go right, high fives and shouting and roaring and jumping around all over the place. But then things go low and they're on the floor and they can't pull themselves up off it. There's something softer when you have a connection with the breath, because it's always there with you. And we have two choices as human beings. We can live solely in our head, immersed in thought and drowning in thought. And when you look at the word depression in some cultures, it basically means overthinking. There was an Irish poet and playwright called Oscar Wilde, and he said, thinking is a disease, and people die of it just like any other disease. When we allow the mind to run riot, it's very important that we help to bring some control over thought processes. Now, mindfulness is wonderful, but as I said earlier on, it's very important to change your physiology first. Now, a simple tool that people have been using, this is called tactical breathing. And this is used by special weapons and tactics and Navy SEALs going into an operation. And you can imagine these guys are going into, quite a difficult situation, and basically their lives are under threat. The exercise they use is called box breathing to help bring a balance in the autonomic nervous system. And it's simply breathing in for 4 seconds and holding for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds and holding for 4 seconds. It will depend on the person's Bolt score, but it would go as follows. To breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. a very simple exercise.
How many cycles do you repeat?
You could do it for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You could do it for just a few minutes. It's really an exercise that you would practice in order to feel a benefit from it.
Can I ask you about the holding of the breath after an inhale and after the exhale? What's the difference? It sounds like in your book, you write a lot about holding the breath after the exhale, right?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. In terms of a measurement of breath hold time, we always do measurements after an exhalation. And the reason being is that if I had a group of 10 people in front of me, and if I all asked them to take a breath in, they will all take a different size breath in, depending on the size of the individual. This will influence their breath hold time. So we couldn't use it as a measurement. When we get anxious during the day, it's often that we will breathe in and hold our breath. So we didn't want to necessarily be replicating that. Now, when you voluntarily breathe in and hold your breath, you do allow more oxygen to transfer from the lungs into the blood. So there can be a benefit that way. But the reason that we do primarily a normal breath in through the nose and a normal breath out through the nose and then pinch the nose is that we can have a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. So, and also when we take a normal breath in through the nose and a normal breath out through the nose and then hold our breath, we help to stimulate the vagus nerve. So there's, in terms of bringing calmness, because like some of the people in this year that I've worked with are people recovering from long COVID, and their autonomic nervous system is so taxed. Now, I've worked with chronic fatigue in the past. That can be a dreadful condition. Long COVID is worse. And these individuals, we literally had to do the breathing exercises Zoom into their bedroom because they are bedbound. If they sit up or if they stand up, their heart rate shoots up to maybe 140 beats or 180 beats per minute, because associated with that is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So here you have an individual with a breath hold time of 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and 5 seconds. They can't even talk because they are so caught for breath. That individual won't be able to do slow breathing. That individual is feeling so much air hunger just during their normal everyday breathing. But we give them small little breath holds of maybe 2 seconds. Breathe in through the nose, breathe out through the nose, and pinch the nose, 1, 2. Now breathe normally for about 15 or 20 seconds. And again, breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, 1, 2. And we also give them exercises humming, if possible, even though they have labored breathing, to try and stimulate the vagus nerve. So we do small breath holds, we do humming. When their breath hold time improves, we go on to slow breathing. Now, if anybody is listening and they've been unfortunate enough to have long COVID, I put all of the exercises up on YouTube. There's an hour and 43 minutes. I know it sounds a lot, but you don't have to watch the entire thing in one go. But literally every exercise, along with the reasoning behind it, is there. And we have used them. And we have used them successfully. Now, the road can be long, but at the same time, at least it's a path.
Can you say a little more about the carbon dioxide? Because I learned that. It was completely new to me because I always grew up hearing that carbon dioxide is just a waste gas, right? But
yes.
When I learned through your book and through your work, the importance of it, I was just completely fascinated and my mind was blown. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the gas carbon dioxide is not really in the atmosphere that much. The concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere is 21%. We all know that. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 0.04%. But the human body needs a concentration of 5%. So where do we get carbon dioxide from? We produce it as part of our metabolism. As human beings, we eat food, we breathe in oxygen, that generates energy, and carbon dioxide is generated as a byproduct of the generation of energy. It's the volume of air that we breathe which determines the carbon dioxide in the lungs. And it's the carbon dioxide in the lungs which determines the carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the lungs. Back in 1904, a Danish physiologist called Christian Bohr, Bohr, he wrote that it's the carbon dioxide pressure in the blood that is the key for hemoglobin to release oxygen to the tissues and organs. In other words, if we are breathing too hard, it is very easy to remove carbon dioxide from the lungs. In actual fact, 30 to 60 seconds of hyperventilation can reduce carbon dioxide in the blood by half. And every 1 millimeter drop of CO2 reduces blood flow to the brain by 2%. All it takes is 30 seconds to 1 minute of big full breaths to reduce blood flow to the brain by 40%. Now, I'll give you an example in this too. I was doing an exam, and as I said, as a kid at university, I was pretty highly strung. And, physiologically, I wasn't in a good place. I was anxious going into the exam. And before I walked into the exam hall, I went for a walk for about 2 to 3 minutes. And during those 2 to 3 minutes, I took these full big breaths because I was trying to calm down. But I took full big breaths, over-breathed, and it caused me dizziness and lightheadedness. And I went into the exam hall and I was all over the place. It was entirely the wrong thing to do. Now, despite this being normal physiology, if one Googles Bohr effect, BOHR, or the oxygen dissociation curve, they will see that when there is a loss of carbon dioxide in the blood pH increases, the curve shifts to the left, and hemoglobin, which is the main carrier of oxygen in the blood, holds onto oxygen more readily. You don't want your blood holding onto oxygen. You want your blood releasing oxygen throughout the body, to the tissues and to the organs, including the heart and including the brain. But if your blood is holding onto oxygen, and this will be due to harder and faster breathing. So ironically, the harder and faster we breathe, the more our blood vessels constrict and the less oxygen is delivered throughout the body. Now, Anna, I really feel that yoga instructors should know about this, because how many of them are encouraging their students to breathe harder and faster? Pilates instructors and many counselors, and the instruction to go home and take a few deep breaths for yourself. It could be actually very harmful.
Yeah.
And there's another thing is that there are breathing exercises out there. I'll give you one example. We have a psychologist instructor. There's many instructors, but one gave me a case in particular. This was an individual who came across a breathing technique, hyperventilated for 1 hour, only did it once, and developed facial spasms, tics. These facial spasms and tics were present for 5 years until he started to do the breathe light exercises. The psychologist is now working with him. I spoke with the psychologist last week, but we have countless times and reports of people that they had adverse reactions to hyperventilation. If one is practicing any breathing exercise involving hyperventilation, do it short term, but always make sure you breathe light afterwards and recover. Hyperventilation can be good. If you were to take 20 full, big, fast breaths in and out, for some people that can be helpful because it's a stressor. But if you stress the body and mind by breathing hard and fast, give plenty of time to bring your body and mind into recovery.
Good information. So going back to the carbon dioxide again, this is why when we are in an anxiety or panic attack, we breathe into the bag, right? So that we can breathe our own carbon dioxide back into the lungs. So when you say engage the diaphragm, is that the same as the belly breaths?
Yeah, pretty much. But the only problem with belly breaths is that if I was to say to a student, I want you to breathe now using their belly, they might start pushing and pulling their belly in. And it might not necessarily be driven by the diaphragm. So when we think of it, that your diaphragm breathing muscle is separating your chest from your abdomen. And when carbon dioxide increases and blood pH drops, the medulla will send a signal. So the brain sends a signal to the diaphragm breathing muscle. And the diaphragm breathing muscle during rest will move down by about 2 to 3 centimeters. As the diaphragm muscle moves downwards, your ribs will come out. There will be movement to the front and movement to the back. In other words, we don't just have movement to the front. A very easy way to do it would be to put your hands either side of your lower ribs. And that as you breathe in, that you're just gently moving your ribs outwards. And as you breathe out, you're feeling your ribs moving inwards. And as you breathe in, you're gently imagining and feeling your ribs moving outwards. And as you breathe out, you're gently imagining and feeling your ribs moving inwards. And if you have, as you breathe in, your ribs are moving out, and as you breathe out, your ribs are moving in, this is a good gauge of the generation of intra-abdominal pressure, because the diaphragm is not just here to provide respiration or assist with respiration. It also provides stabilization for the spine. And the diaphragm breathing muscle is also connected with the emotions. So when we breathe nose, slow and low, it has a calming effect. Nose breathing has a calming effect. Slow breathing has a calming effect. Low breathing has a calming effect. Now, when you were doing that exercise and you had your hands either side of your lower ribs, you weren't intentionally taking full big breaths. You don't have to take full big breaths to engage the diaphragm. A young baby is naturally going to breathe nose, a young infant, because anatomically, they don't breathe through the mouth until after a few months. If, for example, the baby has any difficulties, they switch to mouth breathing. But when we are born, we only breathe through the nose anatomically. And you will see that a young baby is nasal breathing, and it's driven by the diaphragm. The young baby isn't there taking these full big breaths because it believes that it's good to take full big breaths. That's nature.
That was one thing I was doing wrong before. I would just try to breathe hard so that I could feel not the gentle diaphragm movement, but really, and I realized that was wrong. Oh my gosh, I have so many personal stories, but I'm not going to go into my personal stories, what kind of dysfunctional breathing I had. What I found interesting in your book is how breathing is different for females. Yes. And you talk about menstrual cycle, menopause. It was so fascinating. It's just mind-blowing. I want you to say just a few words about that too today.
Yeah, like here is another issue. Why is this not being discussed?
Yes, right?
It's
pregnancy
crazy.
And breathing. When I was pregnant, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. I went to the store, and that's the first time in my life I purchased the Breathe Right stripes, and I was using it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can breathe. It was just this amazing tool. But how is that not discussed? You're so right. So you talk about that in this later phase of the menstrual cycle. No, you tell, and I'll maybe add my story, because something happened to me recently. And after that, I read your book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, of course, this makes total sense. So
sure, this information has been known since 1905, that the breathing of women is different than the breathing of men. And women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience panic disorder than men. 2 to 3 times more. So in terms of the monthly cycle, when you think of the different phases, menstruation, the follicular phase, proliferative phase, ovulation, luteal phase, secretory phase, it's post-ovulation, mid-luteal phase, that there's an increase in a hormone called progesterone. There's also an increase in estrogen, but progesterone seems to be the hormone that has the greatest impact on breathing. So when there's an increase in progesterone, breathing becomes faster and harder. So the female is likely to have faster and harder breathing. And this can cause her carbon dioxide levels to drop by as much as 25%. When carbon dioxide levels are dropping by that much, blood vessels are going to constrict, and there's less oxygen delivery throughout the body, including the brain. But this change in carbon dioxide and resultant increase in blood pH can cause pain perception to increase and pain thresholds to lower. But it can also bring on anxiety, panic disorder, and fatigue. So there have been studies looking at individuals, women with fibromyalgia, that they met the diagnostic criteria for fibromyalgia in the latter phase of the monthly cycle, and not in the earlier phase. Now, what I would say here is that I think it's very important for women to track their breathing throughout the monthly cycle. And if you have a woman with a Bolt score that's pretty low in the early phases, well, we have to ask the question, what's going to happen post-ovulation? So, when a female is aware of this, and also for her to realize that it's absolutely vital to continue nose breathing. And it's also very important to practice light and slow breathing. It's not just enough to do slow breathing. It's about breathing light, deliberately taking less air into your body. And you could do this maybe when you feel more control of your breathing. But if your breathing is a little bit out of control, use small breath holds. So there are small breath holds, breathing recovery, we call it, just to help you with that. Another aspect here is that in the few studies that have been done, the women with PMS, those with the greatest symptoms had a heightened sensitivity to the gas carbon dioxide. Now, what that means is that carbon dioxide is the primary stimulus to breathe. And if you're very sensitive to an accumulation of carbon dioxide, your breathing is going to be faster and harder. So indirectly, it's suggesting that faster and harder breathing is contributing to the symptoms of PMS. But the one thing about the breath is that the breath is under some control. Now then, post-menopause, women experience sleep disorder breathing that's it increases by 200 to 300%. And women experiencing hot flashes and hot flushes, that can be very much accompanied or associated with obstructive sleep apnea. So I wrote an article that was published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine in January of this year, and it looked at functional breathing to the phenotypes of obstructive sleep apnea. There is a role for nose breathing during sleep. It's absolutely vital, but also correct tongue resting posture, because if your tongue is resting up in the roof of the mouth, it's less likely to be encroaching the airway. But also light breathing, slow breathing, and low breathing. And one aspect then as well with post-menopause is that you can have dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, with the female being in that kind of more sympathetic driven. This is where slow breathing and nose breathing is very important, because it can help to bring that balance in the autonomic nervous system. And it's just ridiculous that there has not been enough research on this. And when the research has been done on women, the research often fails to take into consideration the monthly cycle. And unfortunately, most research on breathing is done on men. There's problems with this. And it's really high time, I think, for females to start. I suppose we have to generate some awareness of it.
Oh, I completely agree. I went somewhere, not recently. Recently, I went somewhere with the mask on. We wear masks here indoors. In the later phase of my cycle, and I knew it, we tend to not feel well as it is, right? Mm-hmm. So I went with the mask into a basement where there was no air, no windows type of environment. And I immediately got a panic attack.
Yes.
And I had to run away from there because I couldn't understand what just happened to me. Mm. And when I read that about this carbon dioxide and with the cycle, I'm like, this makes total sense. It happened to me multiple times, this sensation. So now I know that I can manage this through nasal, low and slow breathing.
Yes. Like wearing the masks have really shed light on carbon dioxide, because when you're wearing a mask, you're pooling carbon dioxide inside the mask. Mm-hmm. And then you're rebreathing this carbon dioxide air back into the lungs. Now, that's not a bad thing. because the increased carbon dioxide in the lungs will increase CO2 in the blood, will actually improve your blood circulation, etc. But the problem is how people are reacting to it. It generates a feeling of suffocation. That's the problem. And if you're aware that carbon dioxide pooling in the mask causing the air hunger, to alleviate the feeling of suffocation, to breathe nose, and to slow down your breathing and breathe low, because it optimizes alveolar ventilation and it helps with gas exchange and it helps get rid of the feeling of suffocation. But most people, when they feel suffocated, they breathe fast and shallow, but that just feeds into the feeling of suffocation. So I suppose the other thing is then when a person improves their everyday breathing and their BOLT score, they will be better able to cope with the feeling of air hunger, and they won't feel it as strongly as, and dysfunctional breathing affects people differently. 75% of the anxiety population have dysfunctional breathing, 75%.
That's insane.
This group is the largest group with dysfunctional breathing. Asthma, it's about 30%. In the normal population, it's about 20%. So in the lower back pain, it's 50%. 50% of people with lower back pain have dysfunctional breathing. So it doesn't affect everybody the same. It affects some cohorts more than others. But if you have a female and she has anxiety, prone to panic disorder, and the latter phase of the monthly cycle, and she already has poor breathing, and now she's wearing a mask on top of it, well, it's a recipe for disaster.
That's me. You're describing me. And so when we wear a mask, we should use nasal breathing. But when I put on a mask, it's hard for me to use nasal breathing. I automatically go to mouth breathing, and it becomes almost, I create my own panic almost. Hyperventilation.
It's a natural response. It is a natural response when we feel suffocated. Because we feel that the best way to alleviate the feeling is open the mouth and breathe harder and faster. And it might give short-term relief, but if, for example, we were to maintain nasal breathing all of the time, during rest, during physical exercise, during sleep, then we would be better able to cope with the air hunger in the mask. So when a person is feeling a sensation of air hunger by wearing the mask, it can point that their breathing is not up to par in the first place.
Wow, interesting point. Also, can you talk about how to open the clogged nose?
Sure.
That's also changed my life. I am teaching it to everyone I know. This is such a good tool.
Sure, I think it's magic. Since 1923, it has been known that if you hold your breath, you open up your nose. Now, there are 3 ways to open up the nose. One is by holding the breath. One is by doing physical exercise with your mouth closed. Or the other is by having sex. And that recent one came out in the last couple of months. To open up your nose, you can do this exercise. Now, if somebody is prone to panic disorder, they have to go very easy, because the feeling of air hunger might just put them into a little bit of a stress response. To open up your nose, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, pinch your nose, and just gently nod your head up and down. And you're gently nodding your head up and down, holding your breath. And when you feel a moderate air hunger, let go but breathe in through your nose. To decongest your nose, you want to hold your breath for a reasonably long period of time, but do it within your comfort levels. So don't do it to the point that it makes you feel stressed. And just bear in mind that if you are prone to panic disorder, you could have a very strong reaction towards the feeling of suffocation, so you have to go easy. With that exercise, do it about 6 times and have maybe a minute's rest in between each. But every time your nose gets stuffy, even if it was COVID or a head cold or whatever, you will be able to decongest your nose by simply taking a normal breath in and out through your nose, pinching your nose, holding your nose, and nodding your head up and down until you feel that moderate air hunger. Then let go, breathe in through your nose and breathe normally, calm your breathing. And then a minute later, do it again. Do it 5 or 6 times. Your nose will open up.
I know. I tried many times and it does work. we mentioned both very quickly mouth taping. I do tape my mouth for sleeping too now, and you mentioned it too. Can you say a few words about this too, so that people don't go like, wow, what is she talking about? We're not talking about duct taping your mouth.
No.
And there are some products, right, for this, for children and for adults.
Yeah. There's different products in the market for taping them out. There's many products. A product that we use, which is my own product, is called Myotape. And basically the mouth taping with Myotape is that it's an elasticated tape that you just gently stretch by about 30% before you put it to the mouth, but it surrounds your mouth. It doesn't actually touch your lips. So it's a tape that surrounds the mouth to bring the lips together. So if you did have an emergency, you could revert to mouth breathing. So even though the whole objective is to make sure to breathe through the nose, you still know that your mouth is there if you really needed it. And we originally brought it out for children because, of course, you can't put a tape across the child's lips. And we use it as a training tool for kids during the day. So many children, when they are distracted, they're kind of watching television or maybe on iPhone or iPad or whatever, and their mouth is hanging open. And it's not good because they have low tongue resting posture. It affects their sleep. It affects the development of the face. So we use it as a training tool during wakefulness with the child and then during sleep. But for adults, it become quite popular, and especially adults who were a little bit apprehensive about wearing tape across their lips for good enough reason. So so the Myotape it's an elasticated cotton tape that surrounds the mouth to bring the lips together. And it's pretty inexpensive. Like it's $25 for 3 months supply. And that includes international shipping. But the one thing is, it's not everybody needs to use tape. It's only if you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. So, if you wake up tomorrow morning and you feel that your mouth is dry, I would really encourage you to start breathing through your nose. It can really improve your sleep.
Mm-hmm. And you said that dry lips, right? Cracked lips, dry lips is also a sign of dysfunctional breathing. And double chin. I found that very interesting.
Well, if you have jaws like mine, that my lower jaw is set back. So my maxilla is set back because I was a mouth breathing kid. My nose is crooked. My maxilla is set back. I've had to have orthodontic work. My mandible, which is the lower jaw, is even set further back. And that results in a double chin. And the reason that one has a double chin is not necessarily due to being overweight. The problem is that the jaws aren't forward enough in the face. So double chin is not a great sign in terms of health. And the problem is it's regarding sleep. Because if the jaws develop the way they should develop, they've grown forward on the face. And when the jaws have grown forward on the face, then the airway is going to be wider, less resistance to sleep, less resistance to breathing during sleep, and as a result, less sleep disorder breathing.
Excellent. So if we were to summarize, I'm going to let you go in a minute. If we were to summarize, what would be the main big points for the listener to take away?
Well, I think the first one is just to measure your BOLT score. It's not perfect, but it'll give you some indication. Tune in on your breathing and just ask yourself, when do you have your mouth open? If you go for a walk down to the shops, is your mouth open? Are you waking up during the night with your mouth open? Are you waking up in the morning with your mouth open? Is your mouth open when you're distracted, etc.? Pay attention to how fast you breathe. It's not necessarily about counting the breaths, but the rule of thumb is that if you have pretty noticeable breathing during rest, it's telling you that your breathing is likely to be too fast and too hard. And remember that faster and harder breathing during rest and during sleep, your brain is interpreting that the body is under stress, or your brain is interpreting that the body is under threat. So I would practice 15 minutes before you go to sleep. Sit into your comfortable chair. Put one hand on your chest and one hand just above your navel. Tune into the airflow coming in and out of your nose. Pay attention to the slightly colder air coming into your nose and the slightly warmer air leaving the nose. And really slow down your breathing to the point of air hunger. Do it for about 3 to 4 minutes and check the saliva in your mouth. Has it increased? If you feel a little bit panicked, just take a rest for about a minute or so and come back to it. In other words, use your breathing to help down-regulate. And that's very important for sleep, but it's also very important for states of mind. If you really want to change your breathing patterns, bring nasal breathing into every aspect of your life, but nose breathing is not enough. It's also important to practice to breathe light. By breathing light, we're gently slowing down the speed of breathing to take less air into the body. It's important to breathe slow, and it's also important to breathe low. But if you were to start off with one, start off with nose breathing and light breathing.
What is the low mean? Meaning with the diaphragm?
Exactly.
With the diaphragm.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
slow, how slow?
Well, in terms of a normal respiratory rate during rest for an adult is typically about 14 breaths per minute. But when we are practicing slow breathing, we practice it to stimulate the vagus nerve and to bring a balance in the autonomic nervous system, to dampen the stress response and to activate the body's relaxation response. And during that practice, where you could be practicing it for 10 minutes twice daily, you slow down the breathing rate to between 4.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute. A good average is 6 breaths per minute. So you could be breathing in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds, but do it with the nose and do it with silent and low breathing. So this is not about hyperventilating. This is about breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Continuing with that. And that in turn then is a very good exercise at helping to bring balance in the autonomic nervous system and to improve what's called heart rate variability. So, the science over the last 30 years points to the importance of the vagus nerve, heart rate variability, the baroreflex, etc. And individuals who are not well, either physically or mentally, they typically have reduced heart rate variability. And we can use the breath to help to optimize that.
It's just fantastic. So is it necessary to release all the air when we exhale from our lungs purposefully, or it doesn't matter?
Well, it's important that when we have a normal exhalation, it's important for the diaphragm to move back up to its resting position. You don't want to have partial exhalations. I don't mean for people to intentionally breathe in through their nose and then to breathe out as much air as possible out of the lungs. No. But it's about having optimal movement of the diaphragm. And you could gauge this to some extent when you have hands either side of your lower ribs. That as you breathe in, you feel your ribs moving out. And as you breathe out, you feel your ribs moving in. The rule of thumb is that about 20% of breathing should be driven by the upper chest. 80% of breathing should be driven by the diaphragm during rest. Now, people might say, well, I'm not going to be exercising my lungs if I'm going to be breathing normally or practicing light breathing. But if you want to exercise your lungs, go for a walk, go for a jog, do physical exercise. Because during physical exercise, you're going to increase your metabolic rate. And as a result, you're going to need more air. So you're going to be exercising your lungs that way. But again, the key is nose breathing during physical exercise. It will increase oxygen uptake in the blood. But more importantly, even though it's a little bit more difficult and the air hunger is a little bit stronger, carbon dioxide increases in the blood during physical exercise when you breathe through your nose. This allows more oxygen to be delivered throughout the body, including the working muscles. So your recovery is better.
Wow, this is just phenomenal information. I just love your work. You're such a humble man. It's just incredible. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today, sharing your knowledge, information, your presence, your calm presence, and teaching all these wonderful things. I am so honored that you're here today. Thank you so much, Patrick.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much, Anna.
Yeah, thank you.